Okay, hello everyone. Okay, so the next program in chapter 4 is file letter counter. Okay, so this is just like the previous program, right? But I'll read it. So yeah, file letter counter. Write a program that asks the user to enter the name of a file, and then asks the user to enter a character. The program should count and display the number of times that the specified character appears in the file. Use Notepad or another text editor to create a simple file that can be used to test the file. So it's just like the previous program. The previous program we weren't creating a file, but this time we're creating a file, and we are going to read contents from the file, and we are going to allow the user to enter a character and count how many times that character appears in the content we read from the file. Okay, so now the program over here says, the question says, use Notepad or another text editor to create a simple file that can be used to test the program. I don't know if it wants us to just open Notepad or a text file, text file, and type in something ourselves. Now, since chapter 4 talks about files, we can actually write code that can write stuff in a file. We don't have to create it ourselves. Go open the program and type it ourselves. We know how to do it with code. So let's go ahead and use code to actually type stuff in the file, and use code to read stuff from the file and do the rest. Okay, so since we've done it, since chapter 4 talks about it, let's go ahead and use it so it makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to start. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create the class. I call this file letter counter. and then I'll create the main method. Okay, so all right, so since we are going to be asking the user for input, we have to use one of Java's features for accepting input. So we can use either the J-option pane or the scanner. Okay, for this one, I'm going to use the scanner. Okay, I'm going to use the scanner to accept input. I'm just choosing to use a scanner. I can go ahead and use the J-option pane, but I'm choosing to use a scanner. I'm trying to mix it with all the programs. Sometimes I use a scanner, sometimes I use a J-option pane. But for this one, I'm going to use the scanner. Okay. Okay, so in order to use the scanner, I need to first import it so that this program can have access to it. I need to import it so that this program can have access to the scanner class. So to do that, I typed import java.util.scanner, and this gives the program access to the scanner class. Now that I've imported the scanner class, I need to create a scanner object so I can use it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a scanner object. I'll call it scanner, and I'm going to create a new scanner object in memory. I'm going to pass in the system.in method, which represents my keyboard. It's going to accept byte info from the keyboard and connect it to the scanner object so I can use it. Sorry about the cough. I've been having a cough for a while now, so it's almost gone. So please bear with me. Okay, so I'm passing in the system.in method, which is going to accept byte info from the keyboard and then connect it to the scanner object so that we can use it. We can use some of the methods in the scanner class. Okay. All right, so now we have a scanner class. So let's see what the question says. Write a program that asks the user to enter the name of a file. So first, let's do that. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's ask the user to enter the name of a file. All right, let's do that. So I'm going to type in a system.out.print ln, and I'm going to say please enter the name of a file. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and call use the scanner, call the scanner.nextLine method, And what's kind of the next line is going to do is it's going to pop up some kind of text box. It's going to allow the user to type in something. And next line basically converts or takes whatever the user types, okay, as a string and returns it as a string, okay. It takes whatever the user types and returns it as a string. So when it does that, we need a place to store it. So if the user types in something, we need a place to store it. So in this case, the user is typing the name of a file. So I'm going to create a string variable, and I'm going to, so that I can store what the user types in there. So string variable is going to be called file name. Okay, I'm going to say user file name, and user file name is going to store what the user types. Okay, so now we're going to have the file name. Now, because we're going to be using files as well, we need to go ahead and import the java.io .asterisk class. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Because we're going to be using files, we need to import java.io .asterisk, which is this. Because we're going to be using files, we're going to be using the print writer and other stuff, you know. Okay. So now the user has entered the file name. Okay. I think the program wants, I don't know if the program wanted us to just go into Notepad and type in something ourselves, but I want us to, because we know how to create files and type in stuff, I want us to use that. It makes the program much more. We don't have to go anywhere else to just open the software, type in, and then now come back to the program and search it. We can go ahead and do everything in code, with code. So now that the user has typed in the file name, let's go ahead and create it. Let's go ahead and create it. So to create a file, okay, we need a print writer class. So we need a print writer class, and then we're going to create a file, and then we're going to reference it. Okay, we're going to reference it. Okay, so let me go ahead and do it. I'm going to create a print writer object. Okay, now I'm going to call this. Now this print writer object is what we're going to use to write stuff. Okay, write stuff into the file. Okay, so I'm going to call it user file. Okay, I'm going to say user write file. I'm going to call it user write file. So print writer user write file is going to be equal to a new print writer object in memory, and this print writer, I'm going to pass in the the file name. Okay, I'm going to pass in the file name so that it knows what file to associate with, so that we can, for example, when we use this to write stuff into the file, it knows what file to associate itself with. I'm going to terminate it. Okay, so now we have control over the file. You can use this object that's referencing the file, and sorry about my cough, and write stuff in the file. Okay, we are passing in the name of the file name so that it knows what to use, so that this print writer object knows what to use. If we say use this object to write stuff in the file, it knows what file to write into. All right, so when this file first it gets created, we need to write a message to say, oh, this file has been created. So let's go ahead and do that so that the program looks nice. We're going to create a system.out.println statement and say that the file has been printed. So because we have the name of the file stored in user file name, let's go ahead and use it in the print statement and say user file name. Okay, and then concatenate it to a string and say it has been created. Okay, so now let's move on. Now we've created the file. Okay, now we want to type stuff into the file. Okay, so let's ask the user, what do you want to type into the file? Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So I have a print statement. I'm going to go ahead and copy it, and I'm going to paste it here. I'm sorry for my cough. Okay, I'm really sorry. Sorry. Please bear with me. Thank you. All right. So I'm just going to change the contents of this print statement and say, please enter what you want to write into the file, or write in the file. And the user is going to type in something. Again, I'm going to use a scanner.nextLine method to accept inputs from the user. It's going to pop up a text box and allow the user to type in something, and it's going to return what the user typed as a string. But when it returns it, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to create another string variable, and this time, because the user is entering what he or she wants to write in the file, I'm going to say user contents, user contents, okay, because it's the user's contents that he or she wants to write to the file. So I'll call user content, and over here, when the user types in what they want to write into the file, I'm going to store it in user contents. Okay, so now I have user contents. Okay. So because we now have what we want to write into the file, we can go ahead and use it. We can go ahead and write it to the file. Now, because we've created a print writer object which is used to basically write stuff to the file, we've associated it with this file, okay, using the file name. So this now can give us access to the file. We can use it to write stuff into the file. So because we have what we want to write into the file, which is user content, we can go ahead and write it into the file using the print writer object. So I'm first going to say use the print writer object. Okay, and then say dot println. It's just like a println statement. So I'm using the print writer object, and I'm printing something. Okay, in this case, I'm not going to type in something because I already have this. I want to type into the file. I can go ahead and use the variable. So I'm printing. I'm printing the user contents, and into the file, into the user writer file, which is an object. User writer file is an object that represents the file over here. Okay, it's associated with the file. Okay. So now we've written stuff into the file. So let's print a nice message again and say the stuff, or whatever the user typed has been written to the file. So I'm going to copy this print statement and paste it here. And I'm going to say, now because we have the user contents here, we can use it in the print statement to write something nice and say user content. Okay, I'm going to concatenate it with a string and say user content has been written to the file. Okay, now because we have the file name in user file name, we can even go ahead and use it. So we can say user file name has been written to, and concatenate this to user file name. So it's going to say user file name has been written to whatever file name the user typed. Over here we can do the same thing with user content, not contents. Okay. Over here we can do the same thing. Please enter what you want to write in the file. We know the file, so we can go ahead and concatenate it to the name of which is user file name, which it's going to make the program much more nice. Again, I apologize for my cough. Okay. So yeah. So it's going to say user file name has been written to the file. All right. Now after we're done writing stuff into the file, we need to go ahead and close the file, so that everything that's in the buffer, okay, in the buffer, once we close the file, it can be written. It's like everything that is in memory, once we close the file, can be successfully printed in the file. Okay, so let's go ahead and close it. Let's go ahead and close the file. And to close the file, we use the object that is associated with the file. Okay, this print writer object, sorry, not user content. This print writer object, which is user write file, which is associated to the file, by the file name here. We need to go ahead and close it because we finished writing to the file. So I'm going to just say user write file.close. Okay, user write file.close. So it's closed. All right. So now we've written to the file. We've told the user content has been written to the file. Okay. So what's the next thing we have to do? The next thing we have to do before I move on, this whole stuff here, okay, can give us an error when, for example, when, for example, we are creating the file. Okay, so please enter the name of the file. The user types in the name of the file. We attempt to create the file here. Now, what happens if my computer is full? I don't have any space on it to store that file. The program is going to crash. It's going to crash, right? And we need to write some kind of code to handle it. We need to write some kind of code to say something to the user when that happens, instead of allowing the computer to just crash or stop. But chapter 4 doesn't talk about that. We haven't learned how to write our own codes to handle exceptions. Okay, so because we haven't written our own code to handle exceptions, this is what we do. We can wait, until we learn about it. Okay, but chapter 4 doesn't talk about it. Or we can throw the exception back. And what I mean by that is this: we can say this: any method. Okay, so any method, okay, any method that you and by method I mean any method. So this main method, for example, this is a class. This main method, okay, anything in this curly braces that uses the file, okay, in any kind of file object, anything that's actually using the file, okay, using file objects, or basically anything, any method that's using the file, okay, it basically has the potential to throw an exception, to basically cause an error and say, hey, this code that you've written here, is trying to create a file, and there's no space on your computer, so it's going to crash, and you don't have any code to handle it. So what should I do? So what you do is this: because we don't have our own code to handle exceptions, we either wait till we learn about it, or we throw the exception back and say this. When we throw the exception back, what we are doing is we are telling the main method that we are telling the program that this. Okay, we are telling the program this. We're saying program. We're saying program. I haven't learned how to write my own code to handle exceptions yet. So I know for sure that this code in here has the potential to crash or to cause an error when something bad happens. But like I said, I haven't learned how to write my own code to handle exceptions. So because of that, please, when that happens, please handle it for me. Okay, that's what I mean by we can throw it back to the method. So the way to do that is this. After after this last parentheses, we can say throws IO exception. IO exception is the type of exceptions that the files, the object, basically this stuff, this object or file stuff, the file class, okay, the file objects can cause, okay. So it's like an IO exception. That's the name of that exception that the file object and basically the class can throw. Okay, it's not throw, it's throws. So when we basically say throws IO exception, all we are saying is this. We're saying that this code in here has the potential to cause an error, but because I haven't learned how to, because we haven't learned how to write our own code to handle exceptions, when it happens, please handle it for me, okay? Until I learn how to write my own code to handle exceptions. So that's what it's going to do. It's going to say, okay, fine, I get you, because you've said this main method has the potential to throw an IO exception, then I know what to do. Now you've told me, so I know what to do. That's what the main method is telling us now. Okay, so yeah, that's my explanation. My kind of general explanation. For you. I hope it makes sense. All right. So basically, but So any method, okay, that contains any kind of file object, or anything that uses a file class, if you don't have your own code to handle exceptions, you say it has the potential to throw an IO exception. So we say the main method throws IO exception, meaning it has the potential to throw an IO exception. If we had a method in a method, okay, and for example, that method which is in this method contains file object, we have to write throws IO exception in that method, and at the same time write throws IO exception in the outer method. Okay, I hope you understand. Whatever method that contains a file object or uses that file class, as long as if you don't have your own code to handle exceptions, we have to type in throws IO exception after the method header. Okay, even if, let's say, there was a method here which had all these files here. Let's say there was a method here which enclosed all this code here, which had this all this file object. Because that method contains this stuff, it has the potential to throw an IO exception. So we type this throws IO exception at the end of the method header. But because that method is in the main method, we also put throws IO exception at the end of the main method header. Okay, so I hope I didn't confuse anyone and you understand. All right. All right, so now this is going to handle it for us. Okay, so now we've written to the file and we've closed it. The next thing we do is we try to open the file and access. Okay, we try to access the contents in the file so that we can retrieve it, store it in the variable, and then start to compare. Okay. But before we do that, let's go ahead and I was thinking about asking the user to enter the character, but we can do that later on. All right, so we've closed the file. So now let's try to access the file. Let's try to open the file. Okay, try to access it. Okay. So what we are going to do is this. We are going to use a file class, okay, and create a file object. Okay. I'm going to call this file opened. Okay. Or basically, I'm going to say open file. Okay, open file. And what this so this open file is an object. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file object in memory, and I'm going to represent this file. Sorry, I'm going to represent this file with a file name, user file name. So basically, what I'm doing here is I'm creating a file. I'm creating a file object here, and this file object is going to represent the file that we've created. Okay, it's going to represent the file that we've created. But the reason I'm doing that is because now I want to be able to access the file. Okay, the first one was print writer. Its job was to write stuff to the file. Now this is going to give us access to the file, so we can read from it. Okay, it's going to give us access to the file, so you can think of it as opening the file for us, so we can read from it. Okay, so now we've created. We've opened the file. Okay, so let's make sure that the file. I mean, we haven't. So we haven't opened it as in open the file per se, but we've represented. So okay, don't think of it as opening the file. Think of it as we've represented the file. Okay, with this object. Okay, think of it that way. Okay, you can think of it that way, or you can think of it as opening it, but not like opening the file. Not really opening the file. Okay, we are just representing the file with this object. I hope I didn't confuse anyone. All right, so let's go ahead and check to make sure the file really exists. Okay, let's make sure and check to see if the file exists on the file. The file has been created, because again, you don't want any error. For example, if you try to open a file that doesn't. I mean, in this case, it will exist because we created it. Okay, and we are using the same file name. We created and we're opening it. Kind of opening it. Okay, or kind of having access to it. So it will exist, but it's good practice to always check to make sure the file exists on your computer. All right, so file, open file, this object is going to represent that file. It's going to represent it, okay? All right, so once it's representing it, we first want to make sure if the file that we want to represent, okay, the file that we've represented here exists, really exists, okay, what this is doing is this. We know that this file, you know, has the potential to exist, okay, but let's make sure to see if it really does exist. We don't know yet, but we just have in mind, we just have an idea that it exists, but we don't know for sure. So let's make sure that this file exists. So to do that, I'm going to create an if statement and say this, create the block. I'm going to create an if statement and say if this open file, maybe I shouldn't use a variable open file. Maybe I should just say, created file, user created file. Okay, so it makes sense. So I didn't necessarily mean to open the file, but I think the right way to think about it is this is basically representing the file. It's just basically an object, okay, some kind of class type variable, an object, okay, a class type variable or an object that represents a file. Now we are trying to use this variable that this kind of class type variable that we've created, okay, or this object that we've created, because it represents the file, we can use it and say, does the file exist on the computer? So that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so if user created file, let me just do that, add it here, call user created file. Okay, so I've called the user created file. So if user created file dot exist, okay, but I'm going to add the exclamation sign here and say this. So this means this. This exclamation sign means does not, okay, means not. So if user created file does not, hold on, if user created file does not, okay, exist, this means it negates everything here. User created file that exists, this means this negates it. So if that means if user created file does not exist, okay, if it doesn't exist, then let's print a message. Let's print a message and say file does not exist. That does not exist. Okay. Okay, and then we don't do anything. We just end the program. But if it exists, we can go ahead and create an else part of the program and say and continue our stuff. So if it exists, then let's continue. Let's go ahead and access the file and read content from it. So I'm going to create another kind of scanner. I'm going to not another kind of scanner, but another scanner object. But this time around, I'm not going to use the keyboard as a source of input. Okay, I'm not going to use keyboard to accept input from the user. I'm going to use a file, okay, so that I can read content from the file. I'm not going to read content from the keyboard this time around using system.in. I'm going to read content from the file. And guess what? I have represented the file with user created file. So let me go ahead and create the scanner. So again, I'm going to create another scanner object. I'm going to call this scanner. I'm going to call it. Let's see. I'm going to say it's going to be a long one. User created. I want the variable names to make sense. So user created file to scan. Okay, just so we know that this object is we are using this object. Okay, this object is going to represent the file that we are going to use to scan. Or that we are going to scan from. Okay, so it's basically that. All right, so user created file dot to scan is going to be equal to new scanner. But like I said, I'm not going to use the system.in, which represents the keyboard. I'm not going to use the system.in to accept input. This time around, I'm using the file which we've represented here as our source of input. We are reading content from the file. So this is what's going to happen. We're going to use this this object to read contents from the file, because now this object, scanner object, is reading content from this. It represents the file. We're going to use this object, okay, to read contents from the file. It's a scanner object, remember that. Okay, so now that we have that scanner object, we can go ahead and read from the file. We can say user created file before that, like, let's continue with what we are doing of making the program nice. So over here we can write a system out the print statement and say we can say system.out.println, and we can say reading from we can say checking to make sure file exists, or because we have the file in a variable, we can say checking to make sure user file name. We can concatenate it to a string and say exist. Okay, so checking to make sure user file name exists. We can space it out. Okay, so checking to make sure the file name exists. So it's checking if it exists. Sorry, if it doesn't exist, it's going to say file does not exist right after this statement. If it exists, let's go ahead and say something too. Let's go ahead and say that the file exists. And then let's continue our stuff. Okay. Or you can even say success. File exists, and then we continue. Now over here, what we are doing is we are trying to read from the file. Okay, so now we can even add another system.out.print and say reading from file. We don't have to put two statements, so we can go ahead and join it into one. I'm going to go ahead and create a new line. We can continue with this and say file exists, reading from file. We have the file stored in the variable, so we can say reading from user file name. Okay, and I can concatenate it with a string and say, and anything that is like a process, we can put like 3 dots there just to make it look nice. Checking to make sure user file name exists. Yes. Okay, so you're on track. All right, so this is going to represent the scanner. Okay, it's going to be the object that is going to be this. It's going to be a scanner object that's going to represent, or that's going to be used to read content from this file. Okay. Now we can go ahead and use it and say it's a reading from file is being printed. So let's go ahead and read the next line from the file. Like with this program, I'm just imagining, or we're just assuming that the person is going to type at least one. I mean, at most like one line. Not at most. The person can go ahead and type one line, but if the person types 2 lines, we're not going to write code to handle all that. We're just assuming the person is going to type 1 line or a word or just a couple of words, or just basically 1 line. So 1 line will work for this. Okay, we're just trying to keep the program simple. So I can go ahead and say user created. We are assuming that the person has already typed something into the file. So user created file to scan. Okay, we can say user created file to scan dot next line. Okay, we are reading the next line in this file. I'm not going to pass in anything. So we are reading the next line in the file, and once we read it, we need to store it somewhere. We need to store it in a variable. So I'm going to go up here and create a variable. I'm going to say user content read. Okay, user content. Let me see. User content from file. We can say, yeah, we can create a variable like that. So user content from file now is going to store what is going to be read from the file. Okay, so that's what's going to be stored in user contents from file, and we'll have user contents from file here. Okay, so now we have, after all the stuff we've done, okay, we've digged deep to be able to retrieve the contents from the file, and it's going to be stored here.